Starting off this list at number 10. This story comes from a man called Carter on Reddit, and they say, when I was about 13, I was an adventure explorer wannabe. I used to pack a tent and survival gear to go camping up the hill about 4 miles from my house. I set up my tent in this small field almost entirely surrounded by woods. I made my beans, went to sleep. I was woken up at 3 a.m. to the sound of what I thought was a wild animal approaching the tent. Not unusual. I woke up at sunrise, opened the tent, and found a parcel wrapped in white aged cloth, tied in straw string with a note on top, "Welcome, friend." Inside the parcel, get this, a calf leg / hoof. Never told a soul about it to this day, scared the soul out of me. Never went camping again and didn't stop thinking about it for months. I truly cannot blame Carter for this at all, because that would have been absolutely terrifying. I can't imagine why anyone would want to do this, but it probably wasn't for anything good. Moving on to number 9. This story comes from the Reddit user Night Owls and is in reference to something that happened to his brother. He explained that one day his brother was out for food with some coworkers. This is when one of the coworkers slipped mercury, the metal, into the brother's milkshake. Where did he get this mercury from? I have no idea. What kind of mercury was it? I'm also unsure, but by the sounds of the rest of this story, it seems like it must have been some sort of organic mercury compound that would have proven to be fatal. Luckily, the brother didn't end up drinking this tainted milkshake, and this coworker was caught. The eeriest part of this story, though, is how when the coworker was being questioned and they were trying to establish motive, he explained that there just wasn't a reason. There was no animosity or jealousy. He just wanted to do it. That is truly one of the creepiest things in the whole world to me. People who try to harm others for simply no reason at all other than because they felt like it. Moving on to number 8. This story comes from the Reddit user Shortweeb, and this is what they had to say. In 4th grade, my friend brought a picture to school with her to share among our group of friends. We passed it around talking about it. It was just a picture of her family, so we thought nothing of it. After school, me and her were hanging out by a tree and talking about the picture. She pointed at something that everyone in our group had brushed over. It was a very clear and visible face looking over her shoulder. I can't joke about this. It was a serious face in an otherwise normal family photo. When I asked who that was, she said she didn't know, and there had been no one behind her when they took the picture. Sometimes I think about it and it's quite freaky. Imagine getting a nice family photo and seeing this sort of a thing. That honestly is probably too much for a 4th grader to even comprehend, but I wonder if any of the adults noticed the stranger in the photo. They would have had to, right? Moving on to number 7. This story comes from the Reddit user Cosmic Comics and starts off from a day they were walking in the woods and came across a blue tent, or more so what had once been a tent but was now torn to shreds with the poles snapped in half, and it was just sitting in a messy pile. When they first spotted this mess, it seemed like the blue tent was surrounded by flowers, but once they got closer they realized it was pieces of paper that turned out to be pages from Stephen King's The Shining. The pieces had burnt and charred edges like they had been lit on fire, as if someone really wanted to destroy the book. They didn't get any closer and just shrugged it off as some kind of student film set or artistic endeavor, but they also acknowledged that whoever put it there did a good job because it was certainly very creepy. Flash forward to this person seeing the news not too long after, and they see that a man who had been missing from the next town over had been found passed away in his blue tent in the woods. This person ends off by saying, "I don't know if he was still in there when I walked past. I don't want to know." Considering the fact that they didn't know what had potentially happened there and still got that eerie feeling, that really says a lot to the bad energy that was in that area that day. I hope that they were also able to find out what happened to that man. Moving on to number 6. This story comes from Chicken Brick on Reddit and takes place in their first girlfriend's house. The house had been built in the woods in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and this story takes place in 2001. They were in the kitchen together when the girlfriend said that she had previously seen an old man with a large white beard sitting in her living room. He laughed this off and didn't really take it seriously, which seems kind of rude, but that's what he did. A few weeks later, the girlfriend was in the kitchen and he was heading from the washroom to the kitchen and this is when he sees an older man sitting in her dining room at the head of the table. He once again didn't take this seriously and thought that maybe she had just given him enough information when she told him her story before that his mind was just playing tricks on him. Fast forward a few months now, and both of them have basically forgotten about these incidents, and there was a friend staying with them who was from Brazil. The friend was downstairs one day and the couple were upstairs, and all of a sudden the friend came bursting through the door in tears. They asked what was wrong, and the friend explained that she was just downstairs listening to music when she turned the corner to go into the living room and saw an old man with a long white beard just sitting there. Neither of the couple had mentioned this story to the friend at all, and needless to say, they moved out shortly after this incident. The person telling this story says that they often think about writing to the people who now live in the house to see if they've ever seen anything strange. I definitely think that they should, and they should give us all an update when they get a response. Moving on to number 5. This story comes from the Reddit user Corky Pheasant and is about a UFO encounter their uncle had when he was a teenager. They explain that he was at the beach in the middle of the day when he saw an oval-shaped object about half a kilometer up in the sky. They then say, he said that everyone, there were over 100 other people at the beach and they all witnessed this, could see that the object was huge, big enough that if it had come down, it would have flattened the entire beach. Everyone watched it for about half an hour, and during that time it didn't move one bit. Heaps of people were just standing or sitting around watching it. My uncle said, and this is almost a direct quote, "You know how you sometimes feel like you just have to get out of a place? Like you have to take off running? Well, this was different. You felt the opposite, like you had to stay." After half an hour, the object started moving very slowly, and then it just shot sideways extremely fast and disappeared. No plane or human-made flying object could have moved that way or looked like that unless the government was or is developing technologies we know nothing of, which is a strong possibility. I can't believe that all of these people had this experience together, and I am just now hearing about it. Do you guys have any theories on what it could have been? If you do, please let me know down in the comments, because my only thought is, of course, aliens. Moving on to number 4. This is a pretty crazy story that comes from a Reddit user who's telling one of their grandfather's stories. He was a Hungarian soldier who fought during the invasion of the Soviet Union. It is unclear what year this was in, but they were traveling and passed by many villages, some of which they were welcomed in, others of course not, but there was one village that he was never able to forget. The first thing he saw was an older lady who was sitting outside of her home with a broom by her side, but she was unmoving. They then quickly realized that the entire village population, every single person, had recently died. People even still had food prepared on their plates, or seemed as though they were in the middle of chores when everyone just dropped. He even described 2 men who seemed like they had been in the middle of a conversation. He never got an answer of how or why this happened, as it is of course unbelievably unusual and absolutely frightening. He always believed it was some kind of chemical weapon testing, which is of course very spooky, but this is just one mystery we may never have the answer to for sure. Moving on to number 3. This story comes from Ardent Seraph on Reddit, and they explained that they had a friend who lived in a trailer park, and every time they would go to visit, they took some back gravel roads in order to get there, and they would always pass an old, small concrete building. The building was really run down with no doors or windows and walls that were crumbling, and every time they saw it, they always felt like they wanted to go and check it out, but they always had this lingering feeling that they shouldn't be in there and that something was off. One day, as they were passing, they saw it fenced off with some ripped up yellow tape. They assumed some kids had been playing around or something and someone had blocked it off, perhaps, but they truly didn't think much of it. A while later, this person was at their grandma's house and they were watching one of those true crime shows that's like Dateline or 48 Hours or something similar to that. The show told this story of a girl who had gone missing in a county that was close by after a party one night, and how no one was ever able to find this girl. Clothes of hers had been found scattered in different areas, but one day a kid had found the exact clothes she had been wearing on the night of her disappearance. The clothes were found in that building. Moving on to number 2. This is a story that happened a while ago, you guys, but I had never heard of it before, and I absolutely needed to include it on today's list. This is the story of the Yuba County Five. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California attended a basketball game at California State University. All 5 men went missing after this night, and several days later the group's car was found abandoned in a remote area of the Plumas National Forest that was way out of the way from where they would have been. There was no reason for the car to have been abandoned either, because it was in totally fine and working condition when it was found. In June of 1978, 4 of the men were found passed away near a trailer camp that is deep in the forest, but the 5th man has never been found. There's a lot of strange information about this case, such as how one of them starved to death even though he was surrounded by food. There's truly too much to cover about this story that I unfortunately don't have time for in this video, so if you're interested, I would highly recommend looking up this case, as it truly is unexplainable and just absolutely terrifying. I really hope that one day we'll be able to find out what happened to these men. And moving on to number 1. This story comes from the Reddit user Data Dawn, and they start off by explaining that they lived alone with their dogs in a brownstone in a gated community. She works a few miles from her home and came home every day at lunch to let the dogs out. After she had lived in this location for about a year, she started smelling a man's cologne really strongly in her front entryway and up the stairs in her home. She didn't really think much of it and just chalked it up to the smell coming from the next door neighbor. This happened for a while, and then one day she found a dollar bill folded lengthwise on top of her purse. This stood out for 2 reasons. One being that she never carried cash, and the second being that she never folded her bills lengthwise. She thought it was weird, but she tried to just put it out of her mind. A few weeks later, she came home at lunch and found her dogs standing in front of her bedroom door, staring at the door and wagging their tails. She thought they just wanted to go and lay on her bed, but she was in a hurry, so she quickly took them for a walk, put them back inside, and then left for work again. When she got back home at the end of the day, she found about 20 $1 bills, all folded lengthwise, placed neatly around her home. She grabbed the dogs, got the heck out of there, and called the police. No one was ever found, and she of course had the locks changed, but ended up moving about a month later because she of course just didn't feel safe there anymore. I so badly wish I could know what happened here, but I am just glad that nothing super sinister happened to her or the dogs.
Starting off this list at number 10, we have the author of the novel A Day in Hell. In this book, Matthew Botsford explains that after he accidentally walked into the middle of a shootout, he got shot in the head and died. He was resuscitated, but he was in a coma for 27 days afterwards. He explains a short time in hell as utter darkness that enveloped him, as he was in thick black ink that poured over his eyes. He claimed that he was suspended in darkness, being blasted with hot air and having demonic eyes make their way towards him until some sort of divine entity grabbed him, telling him it wasn't his time.
Coming in number 9 is Army Dr. George Ritchie. He explains that in the 9 minutes he was dead, he was given a tour of hell by Jesus himself. I mean, what is Jesus doing in hell? Or maybe this isn't Jesus, maybe this is Jesus. Maybe this is Jesus in hell. Well, all around him he claims spirits were fighting each other to the death, kicking, biting, scratching, abuse. Every single horrible act that could be imagined was taking place around him. And next up at number 8 is one aunt who died for a short time on the operating table. Well, she described the situation saying that she was lifted through the ceiling and into the sky. She ended up floating a few inches above a dirty brown, lifeless field, and across a dark void she could see a lush green meadow. She suddenly felt something grabbing at her as if it was ripping flesh from her leg. She started withering to get out of the creature's grasp and saw her body on the operating table flailing around just before she was resurrected.
In at number 7, we have a professor who visited hell while he was unconscious prior to an emergency surgery. He says that during this time he was being attacked by all sorts of vicious creatures, and when he tried to pray to protect himself, they only got angrier. He said that they screamed at him and that there was no God. He says that they spoke in the most obscene language language, the worst blasphemy he has ever heard in his life. Coming in at the number 6 slot today, we got a hospice patient who came close to death. One of his workers said that his patient had a near-death experience one day and was terrified by what he saw. He says he saw what he thought was pain and fire, leading him to what he thinks was hell. Apparently, this man had no closure in his life and wasn't in touch with his family, so maybe this was a little bit of a wake-up call for him.
Halfway through, at number 5 is a Reddit user who has a very interesting interpretation of Satan.
This user claimed that he had OD'd 20 years ago. He died and saw Satan.
But what he saw wasn't what we normally envision, the devil as being, but rather he was a giant fire ant walking on lava.
Even he was confused why Satan would present himself as a fire ant, but I guess demons are gonna do what demons are gonna do.
Okay, if I'm the devil and I'm coming back as an animal, I am not coming back as one of the smallest animals ever.
I don't know, an ant that's on fire and it like crawls up your leg and gets in your shorts and stuff, maybe it goes in your urethra? That's bad.
Whoa, you took it to the next level.
I mean, that's hell. We're in hell, dude.
I'd come back as a dinosaur.
Yeah, dinosaur would be
just a massive dinosaur, not the ones that eats only plants.
No. You want the carnivorous?
A meat eater.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you want.
I can't remember grade 3 science. Is that what it is? Carnivorous? The meat eater.
You have carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. Boom.
Taking number 4 slot, we have somebody who explains hell as just like Earth, but dead. What does this mean? She says that after being hit by a car, she woke up in the same place where she was hit, except the sky was reddish orange, there was no animals, and the plants were dying or they were already dead. Is this real life right now? And the world smelled like rotten meat. Okay, so technically this one was a story on the non-sleep subreddit, but in my opinion, I feel like it seems like a pretty realistic version of what hell could be.
In at number 3 is a man who was momentarily killed in a bar fight. After being stabbed with a broken bottle, this man said that entering hell felt like passing through the open mouth of a volcano or burning lake. People who he knew had died were warning him not to come there, as there was no escape. All he could do was hear their crying and wailing of the souls that were trapped down there. After he came back to life, he decided to become a pastor to save the souls from going where he was headed.
Next up, number 2 is somebody who managed to crawl away from hell. I mean, I didn't know you can go to hell and come back. I thought it was a one-way ticket. Well, after suffering heart failure, he felt himself falling through Earth and landing just before a tall set of rusty gates, which had an aurora of being the gates of hell. Being too afraid to enter and knowing it wasn't his time, well, he managed to crawl back towards sunlight and back to life. Absolutely insane. I'm not sure if I believe it, but if it's a true story, remarkable.
And we're finishing off today's list with a Reddit user who drowned at 14.
This person claims that at the time they didn't entirely realize that they were dead.
They just felt like they were floating on the water. They said they saw somebody standing on the water who answered no when the user asked if they were God.
They told the user to keep floating, so they did. Eventually though, the cool water began heating up until it was boiling. They were paralyzed and forced to be in excruciating pain for what felt like years until the water cooled down again, only to start the process all over again.
Eventually the creature who the user spoke to earlier stopped and says, "Looks like someone's come for you, our playtime is over."
But maybe we will see each other again sometime. The user was then brought back to life by paramedics, the real life heroes. Well, there you guys have it. That was the top 10 scary stories from people who have seen hell. Maybe some of you guys have seen hell.
Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys believe in the afterlife? What do you guys imagine it'll look like?
I believe in the afterlife. Something's got to be going on down there in hell. I'm most likely going down rather than up. I'm
Think
not.
So?
I don't know. Probably.
I hope that the afterlife is just like a really sick water slide that you just like wait in line for, and then you like go on and you're like, that was sick, and they're like, you can get back in line if you want. Like that's it. You just do that for the rest of the time. You're like, all right. Okay.
That sounds sick. That's your afterlife?
That's a pretty, I think that's pretty good.
My afterlife is eating cereal every day.
Cereal?
Yeah.
All right. What kind?
Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch cuts the roof of your mouth.
It does.
Starting off this countdown, we have the deer head. Posted on Reddit by RipeOTCDXVI, they claim to be a forest ranger at Yellowstone National Park. One day they were out exploring a part of the park called Lamar Valley, which is about 11 miles from the nearest road. While on the trail, they stumbled upon something very shocking: a perfectly severed deer head. There was no blood whatsoever, and it was cut off with precision. Now obviously, since this is a park, rangers come across dead animals all the time, but never in such perfect condition. Also, the head was completely uneaten. So now the question is, who did this? Why did they do this? And how did they do this? Moving on to number 9, we have the abandoned tent. Reddit user Not So Single Buck was at work one day when he came across a campsite that was set outside of the designated campsite area, which is against the rules of the park, so he went to investigate. In the tent, he found a sleeping bag, some dirty clothes, lots of canned food, and a teddy bear. The whole tent smelled of cigarette smoke. There was nothing that he could do though until the individual returned. He didn't want to wait all day, so he just took the open food to prevent animals from being attracted to it and left a note explaining where he had taken the food and why. 2 weeks later, he returned to the tent and it had remained untouched. As a result, him and his team cleared out the tent. Whatever happened to the person staying in the tent remains a huge mystery. Did a wild animal get to them? Did they fall off a cliff? A body was never found, so we may never know. Coming in at number 8, we have the wolf pack. This story happened 3 years ago by an old-timey forest ranger that worked in Montana. He was out roaming around on his ATV when he saw an older lady in the distance. She was screaming as 6 wolves closed in around her. The ranger drove down to her as fast as he could, yelling and honking, trying to scare away the wolves. But when he got there, she was nowhere to be found. The only sign of her was a single ring with a black stone which was on the ground where the woman was standing. Seems like the wolves got to her and carried her away. Coming in at number 7, we have the strange blue lights. This person used to work as a ranger at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. There's a place on this ranch that is said to be haunted. There's a number of urban legends surrounding this place, like, oh, it's the portal to the underworld, or it's home to an ancient cursed burial ground, you get it. There's also this very eerie legend saying that on some nights, blue lights can be seen. One story claims that a hiker saw an eerie figure on the trail. The figure was tall and emitting a blue light. Well, legend goes that the blue lights are coming from a shaman that guards the ground. Anyways, obviously these are just legends, right? Well, one night the ranger was out with a scout troop when they saw a bunch of weird lights coming from a trail. These were the infamous blue lights talked about in multiple legends. Everyone was so freaked out that they got out of there as fast as they could. Now, let's just say that they're all believers. In our 6th spot, we have these skinned animals. So a couple of years ago, 2 forest rangers were on their way to a far location when it got dark out. As a result, they had to camp overnight. But during the night, they were woken up by the sound of footsteps right outside of their tent. All of a sudden, they heard a number of people yell, "Get out!" The 2 rangers packed up as fast as they could and got the hell out of there. The next morning, the cops went to check out the area and found 4 skinned animals nailed to the trees surrounding their campsite. Okay, that is horrifying, and I have a number of questions. Number 1, who the heck were these people? Number 2, what were they doing there? Number 3, what the heck? And number 4, what the heck? Seriously, that is so messed up. Were they doing some satanic ritual and the forest rangers ruined it, or what? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Wendigo. Imagine going out camping with some friends and encountering a Wendigo during your trip. Wouldn't that be insane and terrifying? Like if you agree. Well, this happened to a forest ranger and a bunch of his friends. So the group went out camping and all was going well. Until the second night. During the night, all 4 of the men woke up to a loud, high-pitched scream. They assumed it was just the coyote. But the next morning, they were in for a surprise. By their campsite, they found a bunch of animal guts everywhere. The ranger described it as if there was a bomb in an animal and then it went off. There was just fur, blood, and flesh everywhere. That night is when they came across the monster that devoured the animal. They were out investigating a sound when they saw a weird tall figure move in the distance. It was about 6 feet tall and did not look like an animal and did not look like a human. When the creature spotted the men, it took off in a flash. They believe that they encountered a Wendigo. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Coming in at number 4, we have the man in the woods. This next individual was a park ranger on a small island. The island could only be accessed by a private boat. During the summer, there would be hordes of people there, but during the off-season, the ranger would be the only one on the island. One night, the ranger decided to take a hike around the entire island. Yeah, at night, when it's dark. He thought it would be a fun challenge for himself. Plus, there was no cell or internet service, so what else could you really do? While he was out on his hike, he heard a noise coming from behind him. He turned around and standing behind him was a crazy old man. He was a super pale and super tall man with dark hair. The man gave out a creepy smile and then cackled. The ranger ran for his life, and this crazy man ran after him until the ranger made it back safely to his cabin. In the morning, he went back on the trail he had been on, and there were no sets of other footprints, only his own, as if the man had never been there at all. Moving on at number 3, we have the polar bears. So this next individual was a park ranger in the northern part of Ontario, Canada. In the middle of the night, she woke up to hear something outside of her tent. She opened her eyes and saw the head of a polar bear peeking into her tent. Imagine waking up and seeing that thing breathing in your face. Like, what would you do? Well, the correct answer is don't panic and don't frighten the bear. Thankfully, that's what the ranger did. She stayed calm and eventually the bear left the tent. That could have ended much worse for this woman. She got lucky. Like, I think I would have peed myself, seriously. In our second spot, we have the river accident. A man named Kevin Uxbridge used to be a ranger at Yosemite. One day, he was making his way through the gate, which was along a river, when he heard a huge commotion. People were yelling and screaming and crying. Well, turns out there was a husband and wife standing by the river. The husband was taking a picture of his wife and kept telling her to back up, so he could get a good shot. Well, she ended up backing up too far and she fell into the river. The river was pretty violent that day, so within seconds she was swept under. It took the ranger and firefighters 2 months before they could find her body. The worst part? Her body was found in the swimming hole when the river had settled. People were swimming in there just days before they found her. And in our number 1 spot, we have the ghostly body. This next story comes from a trail ranger. One time, he noticed that there was a bunch of illegally placed wildlife cameras around, so he went around taking them down. Things were going well until he started hearing a bunch of weird voices. He hopped back on his ATV, but the battery was disconnected, so he couldn't drive off. He was then stuck there waiting for someone to pick him up. They were an hour away and it was getting dark. He decided to sit down and make a small fire. Before he knew it, the voices were back, this time getting louder and louder. Finally, he could hear what was being said. It was 2 hunters arguing over a kill. That's when all of a sudden he heard a loud bang. It was a gunshot. After that, he smothered the fire and hid until his coworkers arrived. The next day, the two came back with the police to investigate the area. After about an hour of looking, they came across a shallow grave. In it, they found a dead man who had been shot in the face. The freakiest part? It was just the skeleton of the man. He had been there for years. So it seems like he heard ghosts reenacting the murder that happened years ago or something like that. I don't know, it is so freaky.
Coming in number 10, we have bread got you high. You know nowadays when you go to the grocery store and buy some bread to make a breakfast sandwich with some eggs, some cheese, some bacon, and some hollandaise sauce on it, you don't have to worry about if the bread is going to make you high or kill you. Well, back in the Middle Ages, people didn't have that luxury. Back then, there were several periods when there wouldn't be enough bread to go around. People would start to go hungry and they would get desperate. So they would turn to using their stored rye grain to make some bread. And even though rye would be the choice toast for some people today, it would seem that back then you would be at high risk for ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that would love to jump on rye and call that place home. But it doesn't exactly jive with the human body. It turns out that ergot, when ingested, will cause a person to hallucinate. They will get high off the bread. If the contamination is really bad, they could also get gangrene. Coming in at number 9, we have couples combat. When you get into a disagreement with your spouse or partner, what do? Maybe you give them the silent treatment, maybe you talk it out, maybe you just bottle it all up inside you until one day you explode on each other and break up in a horrible fashion. All of those are great options, but what about back in medieval Germany? Well, you would fight, of course, UFC style combat, the two going head to head in the battle of the ages. But if you're reading this, you must be thinking, well, that doesn't seem like a fair fight. There's a reason why we have a men's league and a women's league when it comes to combat sports. Well, they would even the playing field killed in one of the funniest ways possible. The man would be given a couple of things to hinder his ability to fight off his wife. He would be forced to stand in a hole so he would be shorter, and he would have one of his hands tied behind his back. And the wife would be given an upgrade, a bag of rocks, so she could now be a formidable force. Honestly, that seems like the best way to solve an argument with a couple. And also seems like the next combat sport I want to see on TV. Coming in at number 8, we have the merchant's life. When I learn about medieval times, I always like the life of a merchant or shepherd. Both of them just got to travel around the world and sell their goods. Mind you, the merchant would become much richer than the shepherd in most cases, but I wouldn't be in it for the money. I would just want to see what the world has to offer. With all of the exotic items that a merchant would carry from city to city to see what the commoner or king would be seduced into buying from him, this would of course bring in a ton of threat. The average merchant would have to worry about being attacked by bandits and have their life and all of their goods stolen from them, and they might even be killed if they were crossed by the wrong villain. Coming in at number 7, we have most people didn't care about church. Now, this isn't a scary point for me, and for most people watching this video, it won't be a scary point at all. But some people find it frightening to think that people aren't going to church, and it's kind of frightening to think that more people are entrenched in religion now than they were back then, or it might have been around the same amount. I haven't done enough research to really let you guys know. But even though the more salacious parts of film and television and books make it seem like everything was ruled by the church back then, there's a lot of people who didn't care about religion at all, or even believe in having religious beliefs or did anything that was religious. They saw how it didn't matter at all as to how holy you were, as to a reflection of your success or well-being or happiness. Most people questioned the idea that God made the crops grow, because why would he make them stop growing if a person did nothing wrong? There were also plenty of people that didn't believe in a soul. I mean, it makes sense. I have never seen one or anything close to it caught on camera, so back then when your life was crops and trying to not die out of nowhere, religion probably was on the back burner. Coming in at number 6, we have you didn't get to pick your job. You know how when you look out at the world today, people say you can do anything, which is kinda true. You can do most things if you work hard and have a passion for it, but as far as I know, not every single person in the world has an opportunity at every job. Let's be realistic. But at least you have some pretty good options. Your job isn't picked for you before you even get out the womb. But back in the Middle Ages, you probably just got the same job as your parents unless you showed exceptional skill in another area, and even if you were very skilled in something else, your chance to prove to other people that you could do that would be slim, and you would most likely just get stuck in your old man's gig. Is he a cobbler? Well, then I hope you like shoes and know how to use a little hammer, because guess what? That's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. Making and breaking shoes, baby. Coming in at number 5, we have most people couldn't read. You know how today we have everyone tweeting and posting about their life? You have so much to read out there, and only a small percentage of it is actually worth looking at. Sometimes you wish that there was way more people who couldn't read or write, because it would make the world and internet so much quieter. Less options to throw around. Well, back in the Middle Ages, most of the people couldn't read. Most people could just farm and poop and die at age 31. That was all they knew how to do, and they were perfectly fine with that. They never wanted anything more. And guess what? Even if you could write, it wasn't seen as a great illustrious skill. It was kind of a labor job. Like it would have been above digging a hole, but not by much. People who wrote books were just scribes who would write down the words of other people, and lots of the time they would just be copying the words down from another book, so you could just have more copies of that book. You know how many times there was probably mistakes in those books if they all had to be copied by hand? Well, it was actually a very common thing. It was so common that monks who were in charge of scribing would say that a little demon was the one who was watching them make their mistakes and cataloging all of them. Those mistakes would have been taken in front of God when you died and were being judged. That was the motivation to make sure that you were good at your job. Should you get more pay and better work conditions? No, they want the fear of God thrown into your heart. That was the motivation for most things back then. Coming in at number 4, we have the trade system was interesting. Here's the thing, when you're using the barter or trade system, it can sometimes seem like there are rules that have to go down. But other than I give you something for something else, there are no rules. You can trade whatever you want for whatever else thing you want. Like, do you want a chair? Well, what if I give you some hair for that chair? If that's something of value that you want from me, then whoop-de-doo, you have yourself some hair and I got myself a chair. But sometimes the currency chosen was even weirder than hair. There were several records of people using eels to trade. Someone once traded 20,000 eels so they could rent some farmland. Now, these are a bunch of old documents, so who knows what was actually traded because I don't know if someone gets their hands on 20,000 eels. That just seems like way too many eels. Like, I would rather have way less of something else that has a much higher value. What am I going to do with all of these eels in the Middle Ages? I don't have a fridge, so there's nowhere I could keep them. I would have to cook them right away and have some sort of eel party where everyone is eating eels, and I feel like I would attract some strange people that I wouldn't want to be friends with at this eel cookout. Coming in at number 3, we have the food sucked. Food is one of the many pleasures in life. It feels great to scarf down something delicious as you sit in front of the TV to consume some show that you're half watching as you scroll through your phone. Well, back then the pleasure would have been almost nowhere to be found. Could you imagine a time when fine dining was eating an egg? They didn't even have anything to put on it. It was just a regular egg that was probably hard boiled. A hard boiled egg would have been like going to Jacob's Steakhouse and spending $500. An egg! You didn't even have salt to put on the egg unless you were rich. They had wars over spices. That was a real thing. That's how lame the food was back then. All you could eat was plain bread, some stews where you'd mix a bunch of random veg that you could find, and then an egg for Christmas. Coming in at number 2, we have the living situation. Moving out of your house and living on your own is one of the best things you can ever do with your life. You get the freedom of the world thrown at you, and you are now free to do whatever you want. No one can tell you to wash that pan because now you're alone and the master of your own domain. Well, that was never the situation back in the Middle Ages. If you watch movies that are based in that time period, we see royals who could actually bathe and have massive castles, when that was not even close to the reality for most people. The majority of people lived in homes with a couple of rooms that was probably built on the earth that they lived on with some bricks if they were lucky. The whole family would sleep in one room because it would be a warmer situation and there would be livestock living in the house. So you would have some farts from the whole family plus farts from your farm animals all circulating as you slept. It's no wonder that no one would live into their 40s. Everyone's brain was full of methane. You couldn't even get a good night's sleep to save your life. And coming in the number 1 spot, we have a wildlife. You know how today when you're on your way to work, you don't have to worry about a bear or cougar jumping out at you and trying to rip your skull off of your body like you're a kid pulling its head off of its action figure? Well, guess what? Back then that wasn't the case at all, especially if you lived on the countryside. Bears were all over the place. Cougars would eat your livestock, and if you weren't careful, even things like pigs. Back then you had to watch out for boars. They would all have tusks and come to gorge life right out of your body. Basically, everything was trying to kill you all the time.